Let's begin this afternoon in Ukraine. It is a country that has commanded the attention from the mainstream media networks this week, with images that look like scenes from World War II or the end of times. These are the sights and sounds that have been broadcast around the world from Ukraine. For months, protesters have occupied Independence Square and various government buildings to try to force President Yanukovych's hand. But only in the past week or so has the world actually begun to pay attention. Now, people can't help but look, because this is a first world country with deep-rooted culture that appears to be collapsing in on itself. Viewers around the world care, at least temporarily anyway, because the images are absolutely captivating and will continue to be so until the next crisis comes along. That end could be in the making as we speak. A peace deal has been reached between the Ukrainian government and opposition leaders that is expected to end the bloodshed. It is a ray of hope after days upon days of darkness. Earlier, I spoke with RT correspondent Aleksey Yaroshevsky, who was live on the ground in Ukraine, and I first asked him to outline the terms of this new deal.
Well, essentially, this is the biggest concessions that the ruling party could have ever made to the opposition. And not only because they agreed to hold the early election, although the date has not yet been set, and even though they even agreed to return to the constitution of Ukraine of 2004, which essentially gives more power to the parliament rather than the president, something that Yanukovych changed in 2010 when he was his second year in office. He basically gave powers to himself. Now it's going back again to the parliamentarian republic here in Ukraine. But probably the biggest concession, and this is unimaginable, to be completely honest with you, I was shocked when I heard the news that the parliament ratified a law decriminalizing the article of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, which landed Yulia Tymoshenko, the former Prime Minister, the lady the whole world knows pretty well, in prison for 7 years. She's already spent 2 years in prison, and she is definitely seen as the main ally, as the main enemy for Yanukovych politically. He's been so reluctant to let her go from prison that he actually sacrificed the trade agreement with the European Union, because the EU was demanding to let Tymoshenko go. Only then they would sign the deal. So this is very big news for Ukraine. In fact, there's a word on the ground right now that Ukraine may have released its future president from prison.
Yeah,
so this is definitely the biggest concessions we've seen to date. The last time.
Let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. Now, Yulia Tymoshenko, of course, is the opposition leader. She is a former prime minister. Can you tell us a little bit more about the decriminalization of the law? And also, what's the likelihood of President Yanukovych finally signing that deal into actual law?
Well, that deal, as far as we know, has already been signed by both the opposition and the president, and the opposition have in fact managed to push through several laws inside the parliament which could not have happened in any other circumstances rather than this violent upheaval in the capital of Ukraine. Talking about Yulia Tymoshenko, certainly she is the biggest political rival of Yanukovych. Yanukovych instigated, as many believe, this case against her. She got a 7-year prison term for abuse of power when she signed gas deals with Russia in 2009, and she spent already 2 years in prison of her 7-year prison term. Now she may actually walk free, and chances of Yanukovych winning the presidential election if Tymoshenko walks free from prison and becomes the contender, becomes the running candidate for the presidential election, are very slim. So essentially this looks like Yanukovych digging his own hole. I mean, already we have information that many deputies from the ruling party have defected to the opposition. This may make things even worse for Yanukovych. With Tymoshenko, she's called the Joan of Arc of Orange Revolution. She used to be the prime minister. She nearly won the presidential election against Yanukovych in 2010, excuse me. But definitely right now, with all the anger, with all the frustration of many Ukrainians against their power, against the president, Tymoshenko may be back with far more power, far more support than she used to have in 2010.
And Aleksey, I can't help but to notice that you're outside versus yesterday when you were in the hotel, kind of bunkered down a little bit more. Would you say that things are finally starting to calm down as a result of this new deal between the Ukrainian government and the opposition leaders? How are they responding to it?
You know, we would all very like to think that this is the end, that the story may be dying down, that streets of Kiev may return to peaceful life again, but this is not the case as far as we may allege, because literally just minutes ago, one of the leaders of the right-wing sector, the so-called right-wing sector, which is the core of the protest, the guys who are literally instigating all the fighting and all the frontline havoc in Kiev, he spoke from the stage over here at Independence Square behind me, and he said that he cared little about any laws, about any concessions made by the government. He made only one straight demand, that Yanukovych must resign by 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. Otherwise, the right-wing sector will attack with weapons. They will try to storm governmental buildings, and they will again be back to full attack mode. So this, as this statement is creating some serious concerns. I mean, there's a sort of a panic spreading around many journalists in this hotel right now, the same hotel which was fired at, and we ourselves were fired at by sniper bullets at our live position. Many journalists here right now told me that they are actually considering to evacuate from here if things are starting to get really nasty, and nobody can rule that out because we've been to that point before. On Wednesday night, the opposition and the president agree on a truce, on a ceasefire to work out of some kind of agreement. On Thursday morning, the right-wing sector shows that they care little about any kind of agreements. They go in a full attack mode. Almost 100 people died as a result of that attack. So you can see for yourself, it's still unstable. It's still far from being a truce, and we're still far from saying this is all over and we can go home.
Now, I understand that Ukrainian lawmakers within the halls of parliament were also fighting and kind of duking it out. So obviously they are fighting amongst themselves, and there is contention even within the parliament itself. Can you talk to that?
Yes, we've seen some scuffles in the parliament during the day when they were discussing the laws. I cannot tell you for sure what caused these scuffles, but certainly tensions were running high. But essentially after these scuffles, after the break which the parliament announced, after that the information started flowing in that some of the deputies from the ruling party defected to the opposition, maybe as a result of that scuffle, maybe as a result of the violence, and they did no longer want to see that violence in their country. But essentially, and at the end of the day, they had a constitutional majority in parliament, and more than 300 votes in most of the cases and most of the laws were given in favor of these laws. Something unprecedented for rather turbulent political life in Ukraine, inside the walls of the Ukrainian parliament. But definitely tensions were high, both outside and inside the Ukrainian parliament for the last several days.
So with this new deal, perhaps the beginning of the end in terms of these crazy kind of scenes that we see play out with live ammunition being used on both sides. Thank you so much for your reporting, and please stay safe. RT correspondent Aleksey Yaroshevsky on the ground in Ukraine.